Black woman CEO publicly humiliated by billionaire white family. Then she cancels the $900 million deal. Sounds unbelievable, right? But this isn't just about money, it's about dignity. When Ava Johnson, a self-made black billionaire, walked into the Carlyle's mansion, she expected respect. Instead, she was mocked, insulted, and treated like a token. But what the Carlyles didn't know was that Ava wasn't about to stay silent. By the next morning, she made a move that shocked the entire business world forever. The room went silent. All eyes turned as Ava Johnson, a powerful and elegant black woman, walked into the luxurious ballroom of one of New York's wealthiest families, the Carlyles. She wasn't just any guest. She was the CEO of a global tech empire, a self-made billionaire whose company was about to sign a $900 million deal with the Carlyle's investment firm. Ava moved with quiet confidence. Her black gown shimmered under the golden chandeliers, her posture straight, her chin high. She had been in countless boardrooms, spoken on international stages, and negotiated deals worth billions. But tonight was different. Tonight wasn't just about business. It was about history. If this deal went through, Ava would become the first black woman to secure a partnership of this magnitude in the tech world. For her, the money wasn't the true prize. It was about breaking barriers. She had grown up in a small neighborhood where success stories like hers were almost impossible. People told her she would never make it, that the world wasn't built for women like her. But Ava had proved them all wrong. She had built her company from the ground up, brick by brick, idea by idea, until the world had no choice but to notice. The Carlyles, one of the most influential families in America, had come knocking on her door. They wanted her business. They wanted her innovation. And tonight's dinner was supposed to be the celebration of that partnership. The ballroom was breathtaking. White marble floors stretched endlessly, lined with gold-trimmed mirrors that reflected the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. A long dining table sat in the center, covered with fine china, sparkling silverware, and wine glasses that caught the light like diamonds. Everything about the evening screamed wealth and exclusivity. Ava had been in rooms like this before, but this time it felt heavier, as though every glance carried expectation. She greeted the family politely. The Carlyle sons gave her quick nods, their eyes flickering with something between curiosity and skepticism. Patricia Carlyle, the matriarch, smiled thinly, her pearl necklace resting against her perfectly pressed dress. And at the head of the table sat Richard Carlyle, the patriarch, a man whose handshake could open doors or close them forever. The dinner began pleasantly enough. Plates of lobster, steak, and rare wines flowed across the table. At first, Ava thought the little comments were harmless, perhaps just poorly chosen words from people in used to her presence. But as the night went on, the tone shifted. The questions grew sharper, the smiles thinner. "So tell me, Ava," one of the sons said with a smirk, his voice carrying across the table, "who really runs your company? You, or the men behind you?" Laughter followed, bouncing around the table like it was part of the entertainment. Ava's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than anger. A few minutes later, Patricia Carlyle leaned forward, her tone sweet but laced with poison. "It's so inspiring," she said, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, "that someone from your background can even sit at this table." The word background hit Ava like a slap. It wasn't about her business, her achievements, or her hard work. It was about her race. Everyone at the table knew it, even if they pretended not to. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to challenge Patricia. The final insult came with dessert. Richard Carlyle, holding his glass of wine high, looked at Ava and said, "Well, Ava, this is a fine arrangement. You bring the diversity, and we bring the real power." This time, the laughter was louder, sharper, cutting through the air like a blade. Ava didn't laugh. She sat there, calm as ever, her face unreadable. But inside, her mind was racing. She thought of every late night she had spent building her company, every sacrifice, every battle she had fought to prove she belonged in rooms like this. And here they were, reducing her to nothing more than a token. The humiliation was thick, but so was her resolve. She smiled politely, lifted her glass, and finished her wine. Then, without raising her voice, she stood up. "Thank you for dinner," she said softly, her tone steady. "I'll be in touch." The Carlyles smirked, believing they had won, believing their empire was untouchable. But they had no idea that in that very moment, Ava had already made her decision. She wasn't just walking away from the dinner table. She was walking away from them, and from the $900 million deal they thought she couldn't refuse. At first, Ava thought the comments were harmless. A smirk here, a whispered joke there. But as the dinner went on, the Carlyle family's true colors began to show. One of the Carlyle sons leaned over and asked loudly, "So tell me, Ava, who really runs your company? You, or the men behind you?" The question hung in the air, dripping with arrogance. It was designed not to inquire, but to diminish her, to suggest she was only a face, a figurehead, someone propped up by others. Laughter rippled around the table, sharp and unkind. Ava kept her composure, her smile calm and her posture elegant. But inside, the sting was sharp. She had been underestimated before, but rarely so publicly, and never with such casual cruelty. Then came the mother, Patricia Carlyle. She leaned forward, her pearls clinking softly as she set down her glass. Her lips curved into a smile that looked polite but carried no warmth. "It's so inspiring," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "that someone from your background can even sit at this table." The pause before your background was deliberate. It was heavy, intentional, and everyone at the table understood exactly what she meant. Patricia wasn't speaking about Ava's business background, her education, or her success. She was speaking about her race, her origin, her place in a society that had never expected someone like her to climb so high. A hush fell over the guests, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. Some glanced down at their plates, embarrassed but unwilling to confront the insult. Others chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to join in or remain silent. Ava, however, did not flinch. She looked at Patricia with steady eyes, her face calm as stone. But the night had one more wound to inflict. As dessert was served, delicate plates of creme brulee with flames flickering over caramelized sugar. Richard Carlyle, the family patriarch, lifted his glass high. His voice, deep and commanding, filled the room. "Well, Ava," he declared, smiling as though he were paying her a compliment, "this is a fine arrangement. You bring the diversity, and we bring the real power." This time the laughter was loud and unrestrained. Glasses clinked, heads nodded, and smug grins spread across faces that believed they were untouchable. To them, Richard had spoken the unspoken truth. Ava was valuable not for her brilliance, but for her image, her ability to make them look progressive while they held the reins of real influence. The room chuckled, but Ava didn't. She sat there in silence, her face composed, her back straight. On the outside, she looked unshaken, but inside, her mind was racing. Every word replayed like echoes in her head. The son's mockery, the mother's veiled insult, the father's declaration. They weren't just comments. They were reminders of every barrier she had broken, every room where she had to prove herself twice as capable just to be seen as equal. In that moment, Ava wasn't thinking about the $900 million deal, the prestige, or the headlines that would follow if she signed with the Carlyles. She was thinking about dignity, about legacy, about the message this partnership would send to her employees, her supporters, and every young person who looked up to her as proof that greatness was possible. Could she really allow herself to stand beside people who mocked her existence? Could she put her name next to theirs and pretend the insults had never been spoken? Her decision was forming, solid and unshakable. But she kept her thoughts hidden behind the calm mask she had perfected over years of facing prejudice. She lifted her glass, took a final sip of wine, and carefully set it back down. The laughter around her began to fade, replaced by the soft hum of background music and the clinking of cutlery once more. The Carlyles, satisfied with their own cleverness, moved on to other conversations, convinced they had kept the upper hand. They thought Ava's silence meant submission. They thought her calm meant compliance. But Ava Johnson was not a woman who surrendered her worth for the sake of a deal. She was already planning her next move, one that would shock everyone in that room and remind the world exactly who held the real power. Most people would have walked out in tears, but not Ava. She was built different. For years, she had been told she didn't belong. In boardrooms filled with powerful men, she had been dismissed, underestimated, and questioned in ways her peers never were. Yet she had risen above it all, not by fighting fire with fire, but by using her brilliance, her patience, and her ability to see beyond the moment. Tonight was no different. The Carlyles thought they had diminished her, but in truth, they had only revealed themselves. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that hid more than it showed, and finished her glass of wine with grace. Slowly, she pushed her chair back and stood up. The movement was so calm, so measured, that the entire table fell silent for a moment. They expected anger, a sharp retort, maybe even a storming exit. But Ava gave them none of that. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. "Thank you for dinner," she said softly, her voice steady, almost soothing. "I'll be in touch." The simplicity of her words seemed to reassure them. The Carlyles smirked, their arrogance unshaken. They believed they had put her in her place. In their eyes, Ava was just another deal. Profitable, yes, but ultimately controllable. To them, she was a signature waiting to be claimed, another jewel in the crown of their empire. But what they didn't know was that Ava had already made her decision the moment Richard Carlyle lifted his glass and reduced her to a token. That night, she wasn't just walking away from a table. She was walking away from them, forever. As she left the ballroom, the sound of laughter echoed behind her, but Ava didn't hear it. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with quiet determination. Every step she took was a declaration of independence. She knew the headlines the next morning would be filled with speculation. She knew the Carlyles would scramble to contain the fallout. But she also knew one truth above all: no amount of money could buy her dignity. When her driver opened the door of her car, Ava paused for a brief moment. She looked back at the mansion, its golden lights glowing against the night sky, a symbol of wealth and privilege. But to her, it was nothing more than a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but rotten within. She slid into the car without a word. On the ride home, her phone buzzed with messages. Reporters asking for comments, advisors reminding her of the deal's importance, investors eager for confirmation. Ava glanced at the screen, then set the phone aside. She didn't need to respond yet. Tomorrow, the world would hear her answer. Tonight, she allowed herself a moment of silence, of calm before the storm she was about to unleash. In her penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Ava stood by the window, watching the lights flicker below. The city that had once ignored her now bowed to her influence. She thought of her employees, the engineers, designers, and dreamers who had believed in her vision. She thought of the young girls who looked up to her as proof that their skin color, their gender, or their humble beginnings didn't define their future. She thought of her late mother, who had once worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and who had told Ava, "Never let anyone decide your worth for you." Those words rang in her ears now. The Carlyles had tried to do just that, to decide her worth, to put her in a box they could control. But Ava had already chosen a different path. The deal was over, long before the ink ever touched paper. And when she finally announced her decision, it wouldn't just be about business. It would be about sending a message to the world that no empire, no matter how rich or powerful, could buy respect. The Carlyles thought they had embarrassed her. But soon, they would learn the truth. Ava Johnson wasn't someone you humiliated without consequences. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a force. The very next morning, news broke across every financial headline. Ava Johnson cancels $900 million deal with Carlyle Group. The story spread like wildfire, dominating business networks, morning talk shows, and social media feeds. Investors and analysts scrambled to understand what had happened. For days, the business world had been buzzing about the impending partnership between Ava's tech empire and the Carlyle Group. Everyone expected the deal to go through smoothly. But overnight, it had collapsed in the most shocking way possible. The Carlyles were blindsided. Reporters gathered outside their Manhattan offices, demanding statements. Cameras flashed as Richard Carlyle brushed past, refusing to answer questions. Investors, once eager to ride the wave of the deal, now bombarded the family with angry phone calls and emails. Their stock value wavered as whispers of arrogance and racism began to swirl. Meanwhile, Ava remained calm. She had planned her move carefully. When the press conference was announced, the world tuned in, hungry for answers. On the stage, Ava appeared in a tailored navy suit, her presence commanding yet graceful. She did not need theatrics. Her silence, as she adjusted the microphone, was enough to capture every eye and ear. Then she spoke, her voice clear and steady. "I was invited into a room where respect did not exist," she said. "I was asked to sign a partnership that looked powerful on paper but was built on humiliation. A deal built on disrespect is not a deal. It's a trap. My company, my people, and my values are worth more than $900 million. The words hung in the air like thunder. Cameras clicked furiously, and within minutes, the clip was online, racing across every corner of the internet. Millions praised her courage. Social media erupted with support. Hashtags like #StandWithAva and #RespectMatters climbed to the top of trending lists. Celebrities, activists, entrepreneurs, and everyday people reposted her speech, calling her a hero for standing up against the arrogance of the elite. In offices and classrooms, people replayed her words, nodding in agreement. Parents showed their children her clip, saying, "This is what strength looks like." Suddenly, Ava wasn't just a CEO anymore. She had become a symbol, an example of what it meant to demand dignity in a world where money often tried to overshadow respect. Her company's stock soared as new investors poured in, eager to align themselves with her values. On the other side, the Carlyles found themselves under a storm of criticism. Editorials condemned their behavior, painting them as relics of a fading era where money excused arrogance. Allies distanced themselves, charities rejected their donations, and companies quietly backed out of partnerships. What had once been a name associated with power and prestige was now being whispered about in shame. But Ava did not celebrate their downfall. That was never her goal. She had not canceled the deal for revenge. She had done it to set a standard. When asked later by a journalist whether she regretted walking away from nearly $1 billion, her answer was simple. You can rebuild wealth. You cannot rebuild lost respect. Those words struck deep. They echoed far beyond business circles, becoming a mantra for anyone who had ever felt belittled or disrespected in their personal or professional life. She had spoken for them, too. That day marked a turning point. Ava Johnson was no longer just a successful entrepreneur. She was a leader whose voice carried power far beyond boardrooms. And the world knew that from then on, wherever she walked, respect would follow. The fallout for the Carlyles was brutal. Their reputation, once carefully polished over generations, crumbled almost overnight. Headlines painted them not as a family of wealth and influence, but as arrogant relics of an old world. Investors who had once lined up to work with them began to disappear one by one. Some cited financial caution, but everyone knew the truth. No one wanted to be associated with a name tainted by humiliation and racism. Longtime partners began withdrawing from projects, cutting ties quietly but firmly. Invitations to elite galas stopped arriving. Charitable foundations rejected their donations, unwilling to be seen taking money from a family now considered toxic. What had taken the Carlyles decades to build unraveled in a matter of weeks. And in that collapse, they lost far more than $900 million. They lost the power of their name. Meanwhile, Ava's company thrived. The story of her walkout became more than just business news. It became inspiration. Universities invited her to speak, not just about technology, but about leadership and courage. Students packed auditoriums to hear how she had turned a moment of humiliation into a global statement. Entrepreneurs cited her as the reason they dared to demand better treatment in boardrooms. Employees at her company wore her words like armor, repeating them whenever doubt crept in. Respect is not for sale. Investors, too, recognized something extraordinary. They saw that Ava had built a company not only on innovation, but on values, and that made her empire unshakable. New partnerships poured in, ones that valued integrity as much as profit. Her company's stock surged, but more importantly, her team worked with a renewed sense of pride. They weren't just working for a CEO, they were working for a leader who would protect them, who would never compromise their dignity for a paycheck. And Ava herself? She never once looked back. She didn't waste energy gloating over the Carlyle's downfall, nor did she let herself be distracted by the noise of the media frenzy. Instead, she focused on building higher, on proving that integrity could be the foundation of global success. She continued to remind people that money was not the ultimate measure of success. In interviews, she repeated the same truth in different ways, but the essence never changed. If you can't honor me, you can't do business with me. It was simple, but it carried weight. Her words were quoted in classrooms, posted on office walls, and printed on banners at equality marches. They resonated far beyond business. They became a life principle. In time, that night at the Carlyle mansion turned into legend. Parents told their children about it, not as a story of contracts and corporations, but as a story of courage. Teachers used it as an example in lessons about ethics and character. Community leaders referenced it when speaking about resilience and self-respect. The billions lost became irrelevant. What people remembered was the moment one woman stood tall when it mattered most, when she chose dignity over wealth, respect over compromise. Ava Johnson became not just a CEO, but a symbol, proof that true power is not in money, but in the courage to walk away. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.